Hello, everybody. Welcome to Suddenly Remote, Keeping Your Company Culture Thriving. I'm Deslyn Wood, the Chief People Officer of Thoughtexchange, and this is part of our series, Suddenly Remote, our third installment, and one of probably my favorites because company culture is one of my sweet spots, and we're going to be talking about how to do it remote. So I'm really excited about that. What are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to talk about what culture is. We're going to talk about shifts that are going to be happening in your culture. We're going to talk about all the different levels that culture is felt. And finally, we're going to talk about a culture cleanup, a wonderful opportunity we have to possibly not bring everything from our life culture into our remote culture. So one of the first things I'm going to do is an activity. So I've made the decision to break the fourth wall and to actually escape out of my PowerPoint and ask a question. So I'm going to require participation. So if anybody is, cleaning their fish tank or doing emails, you're going to need your full attention. And I'm going to ask you this question here. What do you want from an employee? So I want you to think, and I'm going to come out of it so that I can type along with you. I want you to think of what you want when you hire someone. So when you're hiring or you're looking to find a perfect person, what is it that you're looking for? What kinds of traits are you looking for? So I have the chat open and I'm waiting for some participation. Positive attitude. Positive. I have flip chart dyslexia, just so you know. When you have to type loud, you're like, I forgot how to do it. Positive attitude. What else do I have? Passion. Self-motivated. Oh my God, the chat is on fire. Commitment. Accountable. What else do we want? Yes, I'll fix my spelling, sorry. Well, loyalty, oh, for sure. Don't want them leaving 2 days after you hired them. What else do I've got here? Curiosity. Yeah, thank God for spell check. And what else? Positive ambassador. Oh, that's a great one. Okay. Okay. So we have a ton of great things. Values, flexibility. Yeah, I'll just add flexibility because I like that one too. All right, so I'm going to ask another question now. So this, to me, if we found somebody with a positive attitude who was passionate, self-motivated, committed, accountable, loyal, curious, positive ambassador, and flexible, thumbs up if you would be pretty freaking excited. Thumbs up, clapping. Yeah, team player, I'm seeing a bunch of great things in there. So your grit, well, okay. So there's a ton of things that we would love from somebody. Now I'm going to ask a separate question here. I want to ask you for this side, when you think about your employees, and you think about somebody that you know and care about. So there's somebody at work, have them in mind, that you really care about, like as a person, as a human being. Now, my next question is, what do you want for them as a human being? Like, what do you want for them? You want them to enjoy their work. What else? You want them growth, feel valued. This is going great. Recognition. I can't spell right now, just God help us. Recognition, to be inspiration. What do we have here? To be balance. I like that one. To feel challenged. If I'm not putting yours, it's just because it's going so fast. Learning opportunities. And let's do one more. Oh, belonging, sense of something bigger. That's a big one. I like that one. Learning ops, and I'll do sense of something bigger here. There's many good ones there. Something big. Okay, so if we can imagine this, I'm just going to do a little fanciness here. I'm going to cut this, cut it, paste it over here, and then I'm going to go back to my thing. What did I just do? That isn't what I wanted to do. And just cut this. What happens when you're doing like live theater here, guys? Oh wait, now I'm gonna go back. Whew, I think passion's just gone. All right, so here's what we've got. We've got one list, which is what we want from people. This is what we want them to give us. And then this is a list of what we want for them as a human being. So what I want to talk about how cultures are built is a lot of people feel that they're looking for this person, that this is like a personality type or kind of person that if I found, they would be amazing, like no matter where I put them. when in fact, these things here on the left are outcomes from these inputs on the right. So when you think about that, if somebody enjoys their work, they have growth, they feel valued, recognized, inspired, they have balance, they have challenge, they have learning opportunities, they feel like they're part of something bigger. When they have those inputs, the result is this kind of output. So instead of thinking of this as a perfect person, somebody that we wish we could find that somehow would thrive in no matter what an environment, think about that most of us have the ability to give everything on this list. We just choose whether we're going to give it based on what we're getting from our environment. And if I'm getting these inputs, then I would give you those outputs. And so when we think of it this way, it starts to feel a little bit different about what culture is, because culture then becomes how employees, leaders in the organization go about creating the best environment for outputs. So think of yourself as somebody when you're creating culture that's doing all sorts of activities to create an environment where the culture becomes one of innovation, problem solving, collaboration, care, diversity. Those things are things that people give you when they're in a certain kind of environment. And people do decide what it is that they're willing to give. Just because it's there doesn't mean that they're going to give it. So when you give as an organization, you also receive. What do I mean by that? Well, when you think of the Maslow's typical kind of hierarchy, the pyramid here, is that when people are getting the basic parts of the pyramid, the lower parts we would call them, about security, process, feeling aligned and balanced, they then can give you those higher level parts of their ability. So that piece of strategy and purpose and innovation, they come after the basic needs have been met. And so as a company and as a leader, what you're looking to do when you want a culture of performance and a culture of innovation and a culture of maybe autonomy is to create by having all of these wonderful inputs. And so that's when you end up getting these pieces. So instead of looking for somebody who's at that level of delivery, we should be looking at the organization and what they're giving at the bottom of the pyramid and trust that those outcomes from the top of the pyramid will come. And that's when people feel full and they feel really ready and raring to go to give their biggest part of their person to their organization. Now, you might have created all of those amazing inputs in order to get those outputs in your live environment, but now we have to shift. So I call this section Shifts Happen, meaning that things now have to change. So all of that work now has to be revisited. So when you think of mission, values, vision, these are the traditional kinds of things that you'll find popping up. People have core values in organizations, they have mission statements, vision statements, and these were largely created for a live environment, for offices where everybody met, or for regular offsites and regular team meetings, a lot of face-to-face work. So what does this look like in the new virtual world? Well, these are the kinds of shifts you have to think of. If innovation before was an innovation lab that was an open office with sticky notes, if you had daily stand-ups and a monthly lunch for your team, if you met in the boardroom all the time and went on offsites, for customer focus, maybe you visit your customers, for communication, care, maybe you have life event celebrations and live town halls. Now you're going to be forced to say, well, what does that look like in a remote world? What does it look like? Does it look the same? Well, it probably doesn't. And if you don't make an intentional decision to shift it, you might lose some of those really great qualities. And people will feel like, well, now I just work at home and all the benefits I had from a cultural perspective, I don't get to have anymore because they just forgot about them. And so how do you make those shifts? Well, when I say intentional, you have to think of what it would look like if it was done differently. So innovation is an interesting one. If you have some sort of innovation team or innovation offsites or a meeting room that you go into, an open office, and you do the sticky note exercise, what is that going to look like when you're remote? Well, Gartner says that decisions made by a broader group are better decisions. So the first thing you can do when you're remote is there's a lot of tech you can use that gets to people really quickly so that you can include more people in innovation. When you're doing an offsite or a meeting, you have this sense that we can't bring in 100 people because it gets unruly. It's hard to track all the ideas, but you don't have to worry about that. So if you're doing a thought exchange, you basically just send out an innovation question to as many people as you want. They star the thoughts, meaning that they star how much they agree with these ideas, and then they get to see how their idea did, which is really fun, especially if your idea is in the top 5. So what would that look like? Well, here's one of my favorite innovation exchange ways I go about it. is first, you sort of clean the palette of old beliefs. So you ask an exchange question, which are, what are some outdated beliefs that we need to get rid of in order for change to take place? Really hard to do innovation when a lot of old paradigms are there, because every time a new idea comes up, the old thinking starts to challenge it, and we end up sort of either not going with the new thinking or exhausting people who have new thoughts. So before I do innovation, I usually do an outdated beliefs exchange. We laugh about all the things we're going to let go to make room for the new thinking. And then you can ask a great question like, what creative ideas can we do to provide a great customer experience for Thoughtexchange? So you ask those, and then instead of just getting one or two people's voices, you get all these amazing thoughts from different people about what we can do to innovate to help improve our customer experience. It's a hell of a lot better than this. And I can tell you this because I spent a lot of my years doing this kind of live work for innovation, where you're trying to like grab all these sticky notes or all these sheets from flip charts. And eventually, and I kid you not, I was just moving offices and I found like one of these things from the past. Like, God help us all. You know, that's a couple of days of someone's life they're never going to get back. So this is hard to correlate. Whereas when you're doing an exchange, AI actually themes it right there and then. So not only do you have a prioritized list of all the best ideas, you then have this theme of all the different ideas all in one place. And so that's a really great way of doing innovation at a larger scale, more inclusive, more voices, less time, no sticky notes, no flip charts. What about another example? Live stand-ups and monthly team lunches. Hearing a lot of this from people where we used to see each other all the time. How do we, have these great team, brainstorms that we do daily or every morning when I don't see people anymore? So here's this is one of the questions we're asking right now. I'm sure everybody's asking this as an organization is, what actions can we take right now to have a positive impact on ourselves and our customers? Because right now, things are really crazy internally and externally in the world. And then after you run that, you have your team meeting virtually with your cameras on. Everybody comes in and you look at the answers and you start talking about them and you make actions and you take the steps to make it happen. But your team can still meet, they can still see each other. You just have to lean into some of these tools and not get to a point where you think this is only going to be a couple of months, and so we don't need to have team meetings anymore. In fact, people need to feel connected more than ever. And if you're intentional about it, you can maintain those connections and even improve them. So the other thing about teamwork is it's not just about work, it's also about that team thing, about the classic, table at the cafeteria where everybody's having lunch or going to Starbucks or going for drinks maybe at 5 o'clock. Like, what do you do when you don't have that? How do you still feel like you're part of a team? Now, Thoughtexchange has been remote since its beginning, so we've got years and years of remote experience, and I do as well. I spent the last year with Thoughtexchange remote. I'm in Montreal. The rest of the companies in BC by majority are in Toronto. And when I was with Cineplex, I was also for 7 out of 10 years in Montreal when most of my team was throughout Canada and in Toronto. So how do you maintain a sense of team when the team is spread out? So what we have is we use Slack, and there's a ton of team channels. So I just grabbed one from the Eastern team. You can see they're setting up to do some games on their phone. So instead of playing games like you do in person, if you're in an offsite, you can do games via phone together. So they're setting up a time at 5 or 5:30 where you'd normally be having drinks. And here's another one. This is a team for the sales team called the Art of the Possible that we've just started, which is all the possible things we can do as a sales team. And you see people posting best practices and commenting. So we're creating teams inside of Slack and using technology in order to make a feeling of connection. And I can't tell you how many of these teams exist. And that's really important, again, to be intentional. And if there's a team that you want to create, you can just make one. You don't, and these are, in the old classic world would be maybe employee resource groups or all these other kind of groups. Well, you can use your technology, whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever it is you're doing, to create that sense of teamwork. So now I want to talk about culture being at multiple levels. What I mean by multiple levels is it's at the leader level, it's at the team level, and it's at the organizations level. So you really have 3 levels that culture has to sit. So I call this culture requires a lot of touch points without actually touching. Hope you're all laughing. I can't see it, but I'm assuming you are. So I'm coming back to my pyramid. All right, so what does the leader do? The leader is really the biggest person responsible for those inputs. So remember my inputs and outputs, what do you want from a person, for a person? What you want for a person, if we go back to that list, and it's in the chat, so I can scroll back over here. What we wanted for somebody was to be appreciated, to be part of something bigger, to be part of a team, to feel engaged, to be belonging, learning, most of that actually is the leader's responsibility for those inputs. So how do leaders do that when they're not able to necessarily just knock on the door, lean in and say, hey, what's going on? Well, one of the greatest ways leaders can create connection when they're having these sort of phone calls instead of having it in person is just by listening. Listening is probably one of the greatest gifts you can give to somebody because it's so rare to really be deeply listened to. We had a session with the leaders at Thoughtexchange where we really leaned into what is it to deeply listen and what's your responsibility in asking questions that allow somebody to open up and feel that connection that is harder to feel through distance. So you have to ask questions and not just run through a list of to-dos. Things like, what's happened since we last spoke? Just throw that question down and just give some time. Just give the time for the person to take a deep breath and go, wow, what's happened? Oh my gosh, I don't know. And then they'll just start to share with you and you start to build that trust and the person feels nourished and heard, like they are being appreciated, like they are belonging, like they do matter. Ask things like, what do you want to talk about? One of my favorite things to say to somebody is, how do you want to spend this time? It's your time. How do you want to spend it? And again, it's this gift of listening and this gift of time and pause that we can give our people. What's new? What's happened? How was your week? Where are you at right now? That's probably a really good one these days because every day someone's at a different place. Yesterday, they were totally motivated and high, and today they might be really, really down. And so giving someone the gift to say, where are you at right now? And then not trying to fill the space with to-dos and just listening to them. If we started our first 20 minutes of a one-on-one with this, and we spent the last 40 talking about strategy and projects, you're going to have a much better connection than if you just get into the tactical and we don't leave time for people to connect with you. So this is something I also did when I was with Cineplex. I thought I would share it now, is your team when it's remote needs to have some fun sort of swag and rallying cry. So we did a lot of work on teamwork that was around lion prides, essentially that we were like a pride of lions on the hunt, and our goals that we were hunting we called zebra. And those were the things that we were trying to get because lions are really, really effective as working as a team and hunting as a team. And what we love about lions is each lion is strong enough to hunt on their own, but they're more effective when they hunt together. So this is a really great metaphor for a high-performing team. And in here, we made a poster. We gave this out at offsites. People could frame it. Then, you do mugs, you do mouse pads. You give a sense of being part of a team. And for me, this was a really big challenge because it was rare to have a remote team. And I felt that I wasn't in the main office. So I had to actually be really intentional and make it a priority to do more work with my team. So every time we would have meetings or any kind of thing, we used imagery of lions. And when we talked about our goals, we used images of zebras. So if you look at any of my strategy docs, every time it was a strategy about a goal or an important thing that we had to rally around, there was always a picture of a zebra, and everybody did the same thing. The zebras were there. It was part of our language. It was like, this is one of my zebras. And the idea is that in order to take down a zebra, all the lions need to circle it, right? Because a lion can't take down a zebra by itself. And when we met our goals, we had lovely images. I'm sorry if this is going to put you off, of attacking something, of getting it. And then our group shot, now just close your eyes if this is going to gross you out. But the group shot was something like this, which is when a lion pride brings down the zebra, they all eat together, they all eat at the same time. And that's really what it was, is that we starve together and we eat together. And this was the kind of imagery I used over and over again with the team, and they used back with each other to bring a sense of unity, even though we only saw each other twice a year. So organizational culture, we talked about what the leader does, which is really just wonderful touch points of giving those inputs. We've talked about a team which creates, through those team Slack channels and through some swag or some sort of team name, a feeling of belonging. And then we say, what is the organization's responsibility for culture? Because it has a responsibility as well. So again, we're talking about Slack here. Our organization does a lot of channels for people that are cross-functional. So one of my favorite channels is What Now the Kids Are Home. And I just posted this a few days ago. Everybody's posting pictures of their kids, pictures of activities. For me, this is a free online school that had like really good school for teenagers, because I found like we're not really talking about that a lot. Like courses like learning the history of America through NASCAR, or really strange things, or poetry with music lyrics. So I posted that as a great idea. And then we also have this channel called Oops. And in this channel, and I'm using Amanda, she's amazing, people post things that they did that are funny mistakes. And in this case, what was posted was texting a client like you would text your boyfriend. And so that's so funny. This hashtag Oops channel is actually one of our favorite channels, which is where people post mistakes that they would normally share with somebody in, in the washroom or at the water cooler. We just post those mistakes in there. One I posted recently as I was on a client call, and I got a text that my son was at school and sick, and I wasn't sure if I had time to go get him. And so during the call, I went and checked my calendar quickly. I didn't realize I was sharing my screen, and it looked like I was multitasking during a call. So those are the kinds of things we share, which are really just sort of funny, but it does give a sense of an organization that values humor and values people sharing even when things don't go well. So really, organizational culture is about two-way communication and constant communication. So you have to be constant and consistent. One of the ways that we do it is that we have meetings that used to be every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks we had a meeting that was called a fireside chat or an all-company meeting. One was about 75% could come, fireside chat, and then once a month it was an all-company that everybody would go to. Well, we've actually changed that. What happened is that we ran our COVID exchange. And our COVID exchange, this was one we ran internally. Right when the virus started and we started banning travel and everybody was told that we were gonna not go to our conferences anymore, we asked this question, what do we need to do as a company as we react? And it was really emotional because people really needed to talk. And one thing we realized is that they needed to talk even more often. So now we're having weekly all company meetings. You might go, we don't have time for that. Well, if you have time to invest in your culture, you're going to get the outputs. So if you want people to be clear-minded and focused and driven and innovative and solving problems, you have to create that world by allowing them to talk about the things that are hard to talk about. In fact, this was such a huge thing for us when we ran this first exchange that we decided to offer free COVID exchanges on our platform to anybody who wants to run them, because we feel it's really important to talk about that, because what's happening is there's some elephants in the room. Now, elephants in the room are bad enough life. When you're in a company corporate environment and you have a feeling that there's this great unsaid, you still have some time to have touch points with people throughout the day that make you a little bit less stressed about things you don't hear about. When you're remote, those elephants are like in your room and you're alone with that elephant. And you have a lot of time to look over at it and be like, yeah, I have a feeling something terrible is happening and I'm being left out. So when you communicate as often as we do, so we have our team meetings, we have all these Slack channels, we have our company meeting now every week, you allow for people to ask all the questions and things that they're concerned about, and usually find out that everything is still okay, or if it's not okay, what's going on. So you require constant communication and transparent communication and a way for people to tell you how they're feeling. One of the latest elephants in the room for people, especially with children, is feeling like they're having to struggle between being productive and having kids at home. So our corporate coach, Martin, ran this exchange, which I thought was amazing. For parents with children at home, how can we support you through these times? And so we had 25 people come in with the children and answer sort of what it is on their mind. Some from said, I'm fine. And then we had comments like, I need tools. I'm feeling insecure. I'm feeling like I'm not productive. And I'm like worried about my job security. And that's a big elephant in the room for a lot of parents right now at any organization, which is we're saying it's all fine that your kids are home. It's all fine that you're maybe not checked in 8 hours a day. But there's still this anxiety in there. And when people are feeling that anxiety, they're not at this productive level of superstar. So if you can address those things, people can then bring their full self to work. And that's part of what the organization's responsibility is. And then the last thing is to also make sure you're still having fun. I know I've seen a ton of these parties people are having, or virtual coffees people are having. We had a virtual serenade where people with musical abilities over Slack on a Friday night at the end of a particularly big week serenaded everybody with their singing abilities. And so that was a lot of fun and people loved it. And so you could grab a drink or an appetizer at your house and get serenaded by your fellow thought exchangers. Before we run the exchange, because I want to hear from you as well, I thought I would throw in this one piece, which has been on my mind over the last week as I was planning for today, and that's the culture cleanup. Not everything from live culture needs to come with us to remote culture. There's a lot of old, paradigms around showing up, called the show up culture, where we measure people's performance based on the time they arrive and leave the office, and about how loud they are in meetings, and about how packed their calendar are. And these are not necessarily things that show that you're really a superstar, but these are things that were from our old world that don't come with us. I was on a call the other day, and I was listening to people talk about how do you monitor people who are at home? And I was like, how do you monitor people at the office? Do you stand by their door and stare at them? Do you open up meeting room doors to make sure meetings are really happening? Like, what are you worried about right now? This is like insane. You're worried people are not productive. Why do you think they suddenly are not productive? So there's some things I think we want to let go of. And this means walking away from some things that are really from an outdated way of thinking. What are these outdated way of thinking? What do we want to leave behind? I love this one, last one out. In my old world, if you were the last car in the garage at night, you were the most productive person there. And so that was the way you looked at it. So you just tried to stay there later than your boss. And literally you would watch like the CEO or COO leave, and everybody would be like, okay, I can leave right now because now I look like a superstar. And people who had to leave to pick up their kids at 5 would literally be like skulking right to the door and like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? They're gonna see me. And so I've heard a lot of comments through my career about, hey, at 5:30, there's nobody here. I guess nobody has any work to do. And I would be like, you know what, you can take your work home now. Just so you know, it's on your laptop, it's on your phone. The time of you having to do your work at your desk is years by. But the paradigm of who's here at 7 in the morning and who's here at 7 at night is still out there. And it's time to let it go. And I'm excited that we have the opportunity to let it go. Relocation, traffic, everything to do with cars. A piece would be, and this has happened to me as well, is you'd hear of an amazing role and they'd be like, well, can you relocate? And be like, okay, relocation is from a time when A, one person worked, so you're only going with that job, and B, you stayed at your job for 15 or 20 or 30 years. So it was kind of worth leaving. At this point, most people are jobs, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 years. 2 people are working. It's incredibly disruptive to ask people to relocate. And you might actually not be getting the best candidate if that's one of the paradigms that you have. So what you really want to be doing is saying, in this global world, how can we do work remotely and not make relocation the reason why you're going to get or not get a job, because that's really out of date. Another one, loudest voice, highest title. This is one of the ones we love at Thoughtexchange, which is really this idea that in a live setting, live meetings, people who are the most dominant and the most extroverted are the ones who end up taking over the meetings. And they also tend to be the people usually with the highest titles. And you end up having like a bunch of people who don't share their ideas, who possibly have amazing ideas. They just don't feel like they can share them. It's a really interesting thing when you see this dynamic. I have a colleague who calls it the tyranny of the emotionally intelligent. Essentially, there's like a group of people who are able to dominate every meeting, and then there's a group of people that don't really have a voice. And so if you use a tool like Thoughtexchange, you can literally ask an important question, an important change, ask for feedback, input, and then go through the exchange. And there's no names because it's anonymous. First time I ran a couple of exchanges when I first started with it, I got a comment from a few people of like, ooh, I don't want to put my thought in there because I don't want to bias the exchange. I was like, oh, no, put all your thoughts in there because your title's not there with it and your name's not there. So won't it be great to put your thoughts into an exchange and see how well they get rated without your title and without your persuasive nature? And for somebody who has a lot of luck persuading people, for me, it's very humbling when I put in my ideas and they're not attributed to me and they don't do that well. And so really the best ideas will be allowed to surface as we move away from live meetings. So how do I know this works? Well, I happen to have some good proof from Thoughtexchange. So a great way to know whether your culture is really resonating with your people is when they show spontaneous acts of love for you. So here's a great one. Jamie wrote this: top 8 reasons why I love working at Thoughtexchange. So it's a really great sign when somebody blogs about your company and posts that on LinkedIn. Another great thing is when you see in our exchanges people saying things these days, which we're getting right now, of feeling blessed to be part of this family filled with gratitude. I feel grateful for working here. Is that all the work that we're doing is resonating. Probably the biggest one, though, is where people are posting on Glassdoor. I've worked in the retail industry for a long time, and Glassdoor or Rate My Employer, these were kind of terrifying sites because they so often did not have positive stuff. So when I was shopping around for my role at Thoughtexchange, I sort of blew my mind that they had a 5-star rating. I felt like the only thing I'm going to do is ruin this place. Like, how can I keep this up? and 98% of people to recommend, 100% approval of the CEO. And here's a great comment that was posted only in February, just before this craziness began. If you look here, it says, what's the pro of this company? A large portion of the company works remotely. It's collaboration down to an art. Projects went smoothly, just as much as if you were face by face. This is because of the outstanding efforts made by everybody. It's work to do this. This doesn't happen naturally. And what's the cons? It says sometimes remote feels isolating, but there are many resources available to employees to feel more connected. Don't change a thing. So this is a really wonderful testimonial that was done from someone's heart. I really appreciate it, whoever wrote this. But this isn't the only one. We have things like best company I ever worked for, amazing culture. Culture is amazing. I look forward to going to work every day. This person looks forward to going to work every day at their own house, sitting at their desk, but they feel like they're going to work in a company. So that's just so incredibly powerful. When you work on that leader, team, and organization level, you end up having this culture where all those inputs give you all those outputs. So to sum it up before we do our exchange together, creating a strong culture requires intention and attention. That's really important that you think about it. You have to plan for how you're going to shift from live to remote, and then you're going to have to pay attention to what you're doing as a leader, as a team leader, and as an organization. And remote cultures are no exception. You're going to have to work to nurture those things. So actions, I always try to leave with only 3. Make intentional decisions on what needs to shift from live to virtual and how you will do it. Have expectations from leaders, teams, and the organization around how you're going to build and maintain your culture. And do an inventory of outdated thinking around your culture. And let's not bring those things with us. Let's actually benefit from what's going on now and leave behind some of our old thinking. And with that, I'm going to invite you to a thought exchange to either share an idea or ask a question. And so all you need to do to join the thought exchange is you can hold your phone up to the QR code with the camera on, but don't take a picture, just hold it with the camera. A pop-up will come up and click on it and you go into the exchange, or you go to tejoin.com and write these nine digits in, or in the chat, I believe it's right there. You can just click on that web link and that is going to bring you to our exchange. And I'm excited to see what we're going to see pop up in the exchange now. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes and I'm going to be quiet. All right. So look what we've got here. Anybody, I usually get asked, what's this stuff in the middle? What this is these are all of you. So every purple person is somebody who's in the exchange. The thoughts are all the thoughts that have been written, and the rating patterns. So where there's a lot of density in the middle is the highest rated thoughts, and there's thinner lines or where there's a little bit less, higher starring for some thoughts. And so, but I can see here is overall there's a lot of alignment, but there are a ton of thoughts still coming through. Just want to thank everybody because we've got really great participation. So what I'll do is I'll look through some of these and respond to them, but also have some fun looking at the theming and see what's going on. So as you're doing this, let's just check out the word cloud. So communication, frequent, predictable, and consistent communication, even if there's no update. That's actually such an important thing. When you think about what's going on in the world now, both provincially and federally, we're getting updates daily, even if there's not a lot to say. No one's saying, hey, I don't have anything to say, so for 2 weeks, we're not going to hear anything. But our companies are going 10 days without telling us what they're thinking or doing. And in that time, get a lot of elephants in your head, a lot of dark thoughts. When people are uncertain, they don't fill it with happy thoughts. So constant communication is huge. And we have to over communicate. And that's a huge shift you have to intentionally make, is that you're going to communicate with people. And just, communication is not sending updates and emails. Communication is actually engaging with your organization. So that's a great one for that. Let's go back to our thoughts here right now and see how they're doing. So our big top thought here was mental health will be huge. How can we support leaders and employees? I think there's that leader piece here of what a leader does. A couple of big ones is making space in those conversations for how are you doing? What's going on with you? Are you able to handle things in balance? Sometimes we stay away from questions that we don't feel we can solve for somebody. So if you yourself as a leader are struggling with emotions, maybe some depression or anxiety or stress around family and elder care, you might not want to ask that question because you don't feel like you can offer any answers. But you know, a huge part of leadership is allowing to the person to tell you how they feel and just acknowledge and empathize without solving. And so I think allowing people to exist as a full human being, you know, the fourth wall has been broken. You know, before we would pretend we had no life. You know, grew up in a time where I didn't bring pictures of my kids to my office because I was afraid if people saw I had three young kids, they would think that I wasn't ambitious or I get passed over for something. And we used to hide a lot. And like now it's the opposite. It's as if like you're allowed to have people running down the hall, somebody yelling at you, an Amazon package being delivered. You don't have to pretend that we don't have both lives. And this is, I think, something that we can continue with, which is acknowledging a full person and acknowledging that we're all at different places. And so my favorite question from those coaching questions are, where are you at right now? Which allows a person who said yesterday they're amazing to say today's not great, and not to feel like you've got to then solve for that. That's not your responsibility. It's just to make a safe place for the person to talk. And most people feel like a tremendous sense of relief. And from there, that's a really great mental health booster. What about this one here? Sharing stories of teams in online meetings to inspire and promote collaboration. We're doing a lot of that as well internally, where we share something that went well with a client or internally or with a committee or a team. I think, you know, there's an assumption right now that nothing good is going on or that the wins are too small, where I think we just have to reestablish the idea that sharing some success is great. And it's not embarrassing to say that your measure of success has shifted greatly in the last 3 or 4 weeks to something different. And wins could even be that, you know, all your kids slept through the night, because, you know, that's going to make a big difference. What about here? I'm going to look over. Yes, everybody should be able to contribute, frequent communication, non-work meetings and coffee breaks. Yeah, like grab your lunch and eat it at the desk, and then have 5 or 7 people, invite people you wouldn't normally see. You know, what's interesting is that in most corporate settings, if somebody's like on the 3rd floor and you're on the 7th floor, you'll never meet them. But in a virtual setting, you can really just grab anybody from your organization, put in like a company communication channel, Teams or Slack, you know, who wants to talk about like Netflix show. We're watching Ozarks right now, my husband and I, who wants to watch, you know, talk about season 3, and then just have lunch with those people. You know, you know, break out of your comfort zone, meet different people. It's actually really fun to do that. The shift needs to include recognition for those who can't work remotely. This is a big thing. So we have a group of people who are home, and we have a group of people who are still going into workplaces, but the workplaces are isolating. They're doing social distancing. They're aggressively wearing masks and they're wearing gloves. And there's a lot of stress around being out in the workforce. I think there's even a stigma for some people that, you know, by being out in the world, you're being more dangerous, even though a lot of companies don't have the opportunity because they have a factory or they have an essential service that they're providing. They're in healthcare. So I think, again, having those kinds of intentional thoughts. All right, I've got this workforce that's not remote, who's also now isolated and also now fearful. How do we engage with those people, and what support can we give them? And I'd love to hear any suggestions people have for those situations right now. We sent our people a care package in the mail as a surprise, small investment, huge payoff. I think that's actually really fun. You know, I think if you can send a little bit of swag, or you can send something fun, great. I've had questions before, people saying we don't have cameras, so we can't do video conference. And, you know, Amazon cameras start at around $20, range around 40 is the mid price. If you can allow certain tools for people as well, I think that's a really wonderful way to show you care. Water cooler moments. Yeah, that's what we definitely do. So for me, like our Slack channel of oops with the mistakes, and our Slack channel of like, what are you doing at home now? We ran exchanges on what shows people like to watch, what physical activity they like to do. Yes, many of the old ways, bums and seats need to be left behind. Trust people. There was a question here. I love this one. What are some strategies to influence people who are just chained to outdated paradigms? They say, I understand, but I don't operate that way. I actually have a funny, quick story I would love to tell here. And I was doing a training a few years back on what builds trust. 4 factors that build trust. And one is that you're capable. Another is that you have integrity. The third one was that you connect and you care for people. And the fourth one is that you're dependable, reliable, you walk your talk. It's a very basic model. It's great. And I was giving this to a very senior team. And I had a person who was really, you know, if you're a facilitator, this happens regularly, that person who's just like, you know, the frowny face. It's like, yeah, I don't know, yeah, whatever. I don't need this soft stuff. And I believe that I call my stuff soft HR stuff. And so that's always a great way to kick off a session. And one of the comments was like, yeah, I get being, capable, and I get having integrity, and I kept being reliable. But the connected piece is, that's not who I am. That's just not who I am. Like, I'm just not that kind of person. And it was said with a little bit of like, what are you going to do about it? Like, I'm just not that kind of person. And I was like, okay, I had done my inputs and my output thing, that from and for list. And I looked at the list of outputs, which is what you get from people when you give them this stuff. And I said, if you're okay getting less from your team than I get from my team, okay, all right. That's a decision you're making to get less performance because you don't believe in, open conversations, one-on-ones, recognition, belonging. I was like, those are actually incredible levers for productivity and performance. If you want to opt out, yes, that's not up to me to say you have to. And it was really interesting because I kid you not, a couple hours later after the session, got a note from the person who was, basically reached out and wanted to start talking about this. And over the course of a few years, really did transition. And so I think that people need to learn about this. We need to have space for them to learn these things. And so when someone says, I just don't operate that way, be curious, lean into curiosity. What is it that's hard for you? And if it's this feeling of mistrust, if this feeling that the person is, mowing their lawn instead of doing work, you really want to ask, what it is that they're concerned about. Because when people work from home, they do laundry, they do unload the dishwasher. And when they're at work, they go to Starbucks and they check online for stuff at Amazon. People are not productive for 8 or 9 hours straight anywhere. People are productive in spurts of 30 to 45 minutes, some only 15, and then they take breaks. And their mental breaks are just not as visible when they're in the office, but their productivity is not the full day. And so when someone is nervous that they can't see what someone's doing, I would say when you saw them, you don't know if they were productive anyway. You have to look at the outputs and measure it that way. So I'm just going to check our themes here to make sure I'm doing something. We have remote work. We have important ways to connect. What's in here? Care packages, communicate. And ideas that it's the time to totally lean onto the values of purpose in the organization. It's important because this is the way orgs develop emotional connection. You're totally right. As everybody runs around in emergency mode, we tend to forget about why we're here. And a lot of organizations are going to be judged by how they treated the public right now, their customers, and how they treated their employees. In fact, my daughter was telling me, she was reading somewhere that said that when you're looking for jobs, in the summer or in the future, a question you should ask is, what did you do during COVID for your people? And what did you do for your customers? And by those answers, you'll know if this is a good company to work for. And she's a teenager. So I think it's really interesting that the message is already getting out to that next generation entering the workforce, that how we are behaving now, our future selves will be judged in terms of the kind of talent we attract and retain. Really cool stuff here. All right, so we are down to the last 9 minutes. I am going to grab a couple more thoughts. And then I always like to leave I'm going to try to leave the last 4 or 5 minutes if anybody wants to go off mute and talk, because that's really fun as well. So getting introverted employees to participate in the non-required virtual get-togethers. So that can be a challenge. So, I think that you have to make sure that whatever the event is you have variety. So if you saw, we had a sing-along, just so you know, I don't play the guitar and I certainly should not be singing or serenading anybody except for my children and my dog. What you want to do is, like, one of our things that I showed you on Slack was like games. So there's games you can play. Our family loves to play the game Psych. There's games you can play on your phone, even Uno, you can play card games. And a lot of people can just find the right game to play virtually that doesn't require you to sing or to talk to strangers. So have variety in what you're offering so that it connects a lot of people, which is, really important. I'm looking for a couple questions that I can answer. It's a difficult culture shift. It takes time, and it's culture to ask employees what their needs to be successful. It's important to discuss this in the front line to assess what the needs are and create a culture for success. Yep. And this is back to asking questions you might not be able to solve. it's probably one of the most courageous thing a leader can do is say, what do you need or what can I do for you? Being well aware that what they say, they might not be able to figure out right there and then. You know, I said this in my last session, the era of you having to know everything and therefore having all knowledge is gone. What you're supposed to be is really curious, and then, you know, you attempt to find answers or at least explain why you don't have them. So I think, yes, just be willing to ask people things, even if you can't solve it. People need to feel valued, for sure. There's a lot of concern right now about value. Needs to be authentic so Suddenly Remote doesn't feel like a new artificial culture that's being introduced. You know, I'm going to say that when things are new, they always feel awkward. Ever try on a new pair of shoes? You ever do an exercise for the first time? The next day you can't even walk up the stairs? It will feel awkward. So I'm going to tell you, things are awkward. The first time I had to turn on my camera because we use Zoom, I felt awkward. I was like, this is horrible. Instead of talking to the person, I kept looking at myself. It's like gross. And now I'm the person who's putting everybody on Zoom calls and making them awkward. So it's okay if it feels artificial. That just means that it's new and you're not used to it. It quickly turns into a habit. So trust that even if your initial feeling is like, this doesn't feel right, that's just because you like your old shoes, and your new shoes are gonna give you a blister, but they're still great shoes. You know, a lot of shoe comments. You can tell me I love shoes. One more, and then I'm going to go off and see if there's anybody who wants to chat. And I want to thank everybody. This is amazing. What I can tell you is we'll send out the report. I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. And this is part of a series I'm doing every other week on Suddenly Remote. So also would love to hear your feedback and also what you'd like to see, because we create the content bespoke based on the requests that we get or what we see in these exchanges. So if there's a topic that you would love for me to cover, that's a great challenge for me. So I'll be very happy to do that. How does Thoughtexchange help build trust throughout this shift to remote work? Well, you know, it's funny about shifting. The biggest thing is inclusion. So Thoughtexchange allows companies to ask things very transparently that they probably wouldn't ask in a setting like, what are your hopes and fears? Or, you know, what do we have a client ask about how people felt about the future of the business. So you can ask questions to people. You can ask your sales team, what's the likelihood that you're going to meet your targets? Things that are really hard to do in a room, but when you do it in an exchange and then you debrief the exchange with curiosity and empathy and acknowledging the difficulties people are in, that builds trust. It builds trust and it reduces elephants and it reduces fear. And so the more provocative and deep and important the question, the better the response, and the more you elevate yourself as a leader by having the curiosity, courage, desire to actually work these things out. And that builds a lot of trust. Not communicating, not talking, not asking questions, and not acknowledging the elephants is the opposite. These people are, you know, quaking in their boots right now in fear of what's going to happen to their organization and into their role. And I'm sure that they're not being very productive either. So, you know, you want to really lean into, what do we want from our people? Well, what are you giving them? And if you're not giving them all these things, you're not going to be getting those things, whether they're in an office or at home. It makes no difference. So with that, we have 4 minutes left. I'll stay on the line. And if anyone wants to come off mute and chat, let me know. And if you need to get back to things, thank you very much for coming. Feel free to ping me on LinkedIn or via email. We can put my email in the chat, if you don't mind, Amelia. And do send me any messages or anything if you have some content ideas or requests. And if anybody would like to talk, I'm here for the next few minutes.